started out with this podcast, one of the things that I was and still am interested in is the uncertainty of living today and how it takes us into living with liminality, and never want to overlook a good quote from Dante, which is, "In the middle of the journey of our life, I came to myself within a dark wood where the straight way was lost." Makes me wonder if life's always been, kind of woven together with, with passive liminality. I guess it has, and but perhaps what was liminal to someone in the 14th century would not feel the same to us now. I mean, I should have to think what those folk would feel about the world today. But how do we traverse the anxiety, the turbulence, and the exhaustion that living with liminality can give, especially these days when the world feels so fucked up? The feelings, can be very strong. I've also pondered, what the role of music is these days. I read a post by a musician friend of mine, and he was expressing his exhaustion at living in this world. Is music and art the medicine that we need, either as creators or consumers, to retain, our connection and community, or to, to some way sort of access our subconscious? And is it still as dangerous to the establishment as it once was? Is it still dangerous? This and other, existential questions related to our existence and how we move through the world might be pondered today in today's episode with a songwriter, producer, and musician who such an extensive and rich musical history with some exceptional artists. One of whom, Debbie Harry, is unquestionably a legend, and has just released his latest solo album called Stories from the Borderlines. 11 really beautifully crafted songs that brood with, their imagination, poignancy, turmoil, and hopefulness. I think it's a great representation, actually, of the world today and the wildly diverse emotions, certainly that I often feel. So, Charlie Nieland, it's an honor to welcome you. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Giles. I liked what you were saying before about, I don't know, I think as I get older, I think tolerance and embracing ambiguity is the sort of tonic for moving forward into the world, and that it allows all the experiences to move with, it allows you to step forward into the empty space of the future, if you can, allow yourself to not have the warm blanket of certainty all the time.
Yeah. I'd agree with you definitely. I guess it was interesting. I mean, I did some work. Must be what, 8 to 9 years ago now. And as part of that work, I read this book called the Multi-Stage Life, and it gave a really kind of great example of how, like when my parents were alive, they were born in kind of 1930, and life then, as they were growing up and kind of going through the world, was much more linear. You sort of, if you were lucky, you went to school. If you were lucky, you got a job, and then you retired. It was just kind of like that sort of 3 stages. And now, for everybody, even those who've, I guess, kind of gone into, employed, kind of career path employed work, it's not that, there's not this sort of the job safety. It's much more volatile, and as you say, kind of like ambiguous. So the more that we can get comfortable with that,
I think better. I mean, and I know that that's true. I know my parents, my father worked in the financial world of the 1960s and didn't see himself as anything but a father and a businessman. But I mean, he had fun with his life and everything. But I think times go through spasms of change, and we can look back and it can seem like, oh, things were so simple then, but actually things were complex. And there are all sorts of times of incredible change. We were I don't know, a couple of years ago, there was a art exhibition of this artist named Hilna Off Clint,
Mm.
and she created these immense paintings and was a medium, and all of her work kind of got discovered later because she had put it away, but she did all this work in like the 1910s.
Mm.
And my partner and I were at this exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art no, I'm sorry, at the Guggenheim in New York City.
Mm.
But I was thinking about that time. I mean, think about what it was like to grow up in, say, like the 1890s.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden in the 19 teens, you had the onset of all these different ideas and technologies, and
Yes.
and the world was so different. Like there was flight, there was mass media, there was radio, there was recording, there was records, but also there was through that there was a lot of people were connecting with occult ideas, and that's why these
Yeah.
female artists got together and they were doing they were doing medium stuff, and that it really informed their way of responding to these drastic changes of the world.
Mm.
And I think we're still capable of that, of via community getting together with other people and talking about things in a way that's just not the regular superficial.
Yeah.
Everything is a pathway to fortune or to a profession,
Mm.
and that there are other things going on, that will value your life. And also, when, as we were talking about ambiguity before, the difficulties of life actually lead you into change. And while we all want to be
Yeah.
happy and comfortable, there's going to be things that happen, and those things and how you respond to them, actually, that's where the growth occurs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No, I think you're absolutely right with that. I mean, that's that. I've gone through, just sort of personally, a lot of change. When around about 2016, 17, that sort of time, and and it that's not the only time that we've been through whatever sort of changes, but those sort of personal changes, and yeah, they can be kind of pretty scary, but the last one, in terms of actually what I was doing, sort of physically doing, I ended up doing this and doing some writing. There was a period of time where I had no idea where the next thing was coming from, and that was at that time that was really really kind of scary for me. You just feel exactly that liminality. It's like, well, I don't know, and I don't know if you ever get over those sort of feelings, but I guess once you've been through it, you have an understanding, I guess. For me, it
I
kind of felt
mean,
like the first time.
yeah, I mean, I went through a big change around that time too, is professionally and in my life.
Mm.
I split with my wife of 25 years
Mm.
and moved back to Brooklyn. And but there's, I think, these things that happen set set you up to find new parts of yourself,
Yeah, you're right.
and you end up and you learn to trust that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, for me, I became more confident as an artist throughout that period, and also and learned how to incorporate reporting on what was going on in my life as
Mm.
part of my what I presented. When you're an artist, you develop an identity, and you have like
Yeah.
concerns, and you think, this is who I am, and I'm developing this like theme of myself, or
Mm.
theme of my artistic forward momentum. but you have to look around at what's going on right now and make that part of what you're doing. And that makes everything that you do have an urgency and have a relatability, and it makes it interesting for you, you know. And so
Yeah.
plenty of that around that time, you know.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I did started doing some graphic design. I'd never done it before in my life. Never thought of myself as an artist in any way. We were just talking about that before, and I decided to do this sort of short course because I just thought, well, why the hell not go on and do it? Just do it. Push yourself out of your comfort zone and do it. And honestly, that was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life.
That's
I,
so
d- I,
good.
d- I did it, and I'm doing writing now, and I'm able to do the design, and I found a style that really works for me. I'm not a so-called expert by any means. I don't know the technical stuff, but I found a style that sort of works for me, and I just love doing it. Go back 10 years, I would never have thought that I would have had the balls to do that.
And I think as you go forward in a venture like that, you have to embrace failure. You know, you have to
Yeah.
embrace that you try something and like part of that's working, but part of it's not. And then
Mm,
so then you learn to look around and find new ways to approach things, and that's how you develop, and that's how you develop your life, you know. And
yeah.
so it by abhorring failure and abhorring, you know, and trying to put aside all that stuff and avoiding discomfort, it just, I don't know, I try to, even now in these past few years, I've tried to put myself into situations that I wasn't necessarily used to or comfortable with.
Mm.
And that is, I've been singing in groups, learning about myself as a performer, singing in the Losers Lounge,
Mm.
and it's really informed my work as a artist and as a producer.
So, like, with that, how in putting yourself into those situations, like, what have you? I guess a couple of things come out to me. What have you learnt about yourself, and also the thing about failure? How do you kind of get through that? That sort of feeling that if you kind of create something and you realize, okay, that's not working, or somebody doesn't like it, that kind of feeling, that kind of clenched feeling that you get.
Well, I'm also part of this thing for the past 10 years called the Bushwick Book Club.
Ah,
It's
yes, yeah.
it's a performance series
Mm,
that was started by my friend Susan Huang,
mm,
and she chooses a book each for each series,
mm,
each. It used to be every month. Now it's every few months. But
mm.
we all read the book, a series of songwriters and sometimes actors and other artists too, and then we present a piece of work responding to that book. And
I think that's
doing,
brilliant, by the way. I think that's such a great concept.
I mean, a lot of my songwriting was I I would take a long time with the lyrics, especially.
Mm,
And this taught me to be way less precious about it because the deadline of at the end of this month, I said I was going to be standing on a stage in front of everyone with a new piece.
yeah.
And I learned a lot about how to look at the blank page and just step out into space. I mean, and I learned about how I see an idea in this vague, fuzzy outline
Mm,
in my imagination, and then sort of pick up the guitar or an instrument and allow the first thing I play to be that idea. And
mm,
sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I find that, oh, I've kind of gone off the track and let my fingers play a thing that was not what that fuzzy idea was. And so then
mm,
I learned how to put it aside and just start over, listen a little more carefully, bring my attention back to it, and then usually doing that process, I would find wow, the thing I made an analog to that feeling that I have, and it actually
Mm.
came through, and it feels like I am bringing a thing to life that was like on the other side of this liminal
Yeah.
like divide, you know?
Yeah.
And after doing that a few times and learning to trust my own process, that's given me more confidence to approach a lot of things that what I don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be.
Mm.
And I don't know. To me, like I like that metaphor to meditation, like in just regular breath meditation, when your thoughts are all going, you want to bring your awareness back to your breath, and the thoughts come, and you go with them a little bit, but then the practice is bring your awareness back to your breath. And I saw a Buddhist priest talking about it once on a YouTube video. And it's like, we still do it too. It's not
Mm.
like you don't
Mm.
get perfect at this thing. It's a
Yeah.
practice. And so that's why I try to think of all my endeavors as a practice, because then you don't burden yourself with like, oh, this has to be perfect, or I'm
Yeah.
striving. The striving is more for just to stay with the practice
Mm.
more than to make it like perfect.
I'd be,
Because
yeah, I'd be interested in your views on perfection actually, because I think that that seems to be something that has been part of life forever, like almost like kind of ingrained in society. This idea of perfection in so many walks of the way that products are marketed, the way that people that are on adverts, are kind of represented. And also in music as well. I mean, I guess that there's a correlation between our innate personality, of how we want to be perceived and how we. I mean, I kind of grew up through life, from a very young age, was sort of worrying about what people would think of me. So I felt this sort of obligation to, create things or whatever I was doing for them to be really good, or as good as I could get them.
right. I mean, I think that's there's a Homo sapien thing of us being a species or a genus or whatever we're calling it of human that perfects things and exploits the surroundings. And
Mm,
my understanding is that's what made Homo sapiens break out of the savannah and
yeah.
surpass the Neanderthal, because it wasn't so much that we were that there was like some kind of genocide where we like
Mm,
killed all the Neanderthals. It's like we just exploited the resources way more efficiently, and
mm,
and crit, killed all the game, and then moved on within a path right across Central Asia, all the way.
yeah.
You can find that story, and that was only a few 100,000 years ago, like 100,000 years ago or so. We still have those same evolutionary imperatives,
Yeah.
so we're still filled with this desire to perfectly exploit the world around us. It's
Mm,
got us to where we are, but I think that I mean, there's a kind of way of seeing artistic endeavor as a top-down, like ego-centered thing through our little pinhole of consciousness, that we will perfect something by thinking of things and then using technique to make it perfect. And that
mm,
I still do that, and I did that on this album. But I also understand that there's another way of viewing complexity, and that it's called emergence or emergent complexity. For instance, the ordering principle that guides a flock of birds
mm,
or a school of fish. There's no lead bird.
mm,
It's a series of objects, a series of birds obeying a set of specific directives. Don't fly into each other, fly forward, fly away from prey. And
Interesting.
in doing so, they create these amazing patterns and these amazing this beauty that occurs, but it's coming from the bottom up instead of the top down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there are ideas, there are theories that a lot more of what we consider things like consciousness actually come as a bottom up process. We think of ourselves as a singular identity in ourselves, in our brain, and in our mind. But our mind is just our brain is another organ of the body.
Yeah.
So actually, all of these different biological processes that go back, you know, through all of our genes, and we're all on the back of a whale, you know. And
Mm.
if you allow yourself to let those things come through, let these unconscious
Yeah.
small things come through, that will inform you and give you the character, give your art the character, and it'll give you so much to work with.
Mm.
And then I still will use all sorts of techniques and things that I've learned with my left brain, but it's the right brain stuff that ends up being really the driver of everything.
That's kind of like your instinct.
Yeah.
It's
And like so
mm.
you learn how to balance these two things and how to kind of go back
Yeah.
and forth between allowing subconscious things to sort of bubble up and
Mm.
then using your more analytical and the editing brain
Mm.
and how to balance that.
I mean, actually, I mean, the example of the birds. For example, I'd love that. I mean, I think, and I think of kind of migrating birds as well. It feels like that is pretty much an entirely instinctive practice.
Right.
Of what they do. I mean, and then if I look at me, like I have again, something else I've sort of struggled with is the analytical side of my brain, where presented with this sort of situation, I'll be, okay, well, if I do that, then this is gonna happen, that might happen. And then in a particularly bad situation, you get into like inertia where you can't make a fucking decision about something. And then there's my instinct, which I've learned to rely on much more over these last, kind of 12 years. Um, and your instinct is hardly ever wrong. Certainly, most times it's kind of right.
Right. I mean, consider it like a trade wind or something that it
Yeah,
will be blowing you in a direction, and that is you. You are
that.
that trade wind. So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
allowing yourself to access that gives a certain energy to your work. Now, I've like for instance on Stories from the Borderlines, the new album that I just
Mm,
am putting out now, I went through, I had written the songs, I'd recorded basic versions of them with my drummer, and then started filling stuff in with, I am besides being a collaborative artist and I like to work with people, I also have always been someone who worked in a recording environment. That's kind of
yeah,
how I developed myself as a musician.
yeah.
Even back when I was using two cassette decks in the 80s, or
Mm,
in the late 70s, actually. But
mm,
the process gets to a point where I think I've added, a bunch of guitar parts, and I've got vocal takes down, and I get these versions of the songs and I listen to them and I give myself some space and listen to them while I'm washing the dishes. Let some flow thinking occur where I'm not just
mm,
like focusing on it, and I start to hear stuff. And
yeah.
I'll use my notes app on the phone and I'll just like type big and small ideas for each song in.
Mm,
I'll just
mm,
think, well, what would it sound like with this? With
yeah.
this floaty guitar part here, or what if a backup vocal thing that sounds like, oh, I don't know, what does it sound like? It sounds like Bowie who comes in right here, you know. So
Yeah.
I just write these things down, and then I go and I try them over the course of several weeks. You know,
Mm.
so that was a phase of working on this stuff where I really got critical and I would add these ideas that kind of popped into my head. And
Mm.
then I really found a nice 50-50 of about half the time I'd go like, nope, doesn't need it. And the other half the time I'd be like, oh my God, this really
Yeah.
opens up the song right here.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed that part of the process. And while I loved the sort of spontaneous work that you do when you're working with other people, I love this like laboratory like way of working where
Interesting.
I am very analytical, but I'm also, again, it's sort of, there's a spontaneous brain thought, and then there's an analytical side that sort of conceptualizes it. And then so I just make lists and then sort of
Yeah.
go back in and start trying them on each song. And I do that when I'm producing people too.
Let's while we're on the subject, let's talk about the record for a bit. Um, um, what was kind of like I said in the intro, it gives me a lot of sort of different emotions when I'm sort of listening to it, and I think it's a wonderful piece of songwriting.
Thank you.
What was sort of what was at the top of your mind? What was kind of influencing you? What was kind of going on in your life, if that's not too getting too personal, that kind of shaped the record?
Well, I mean, there was a lot going on. Everything from, there's a certain amount of, the world stress of
Mm,
the the tightening wheel of
yeah.
this authoritarian and this authoritarian flow of the way our governments are going.
Mm,
And also, I had some things going on in my life. My mother got sick, and I had to put everything aside for a while.
mm,
And my brother and I like were taking care of her every few months, flying across the country.
mm,
And I'm at the same time, I'm in a great relationship with that's been going on for about like 7 years now, and
yeah.
that's been very supportive. And so, as I started really focusing on these songs, I realized that I wanted to say more about I wanted to address the politics of the world
Mm, yeah.
at the same, which sounds, like, and so part of you is like, who wants to hear what I have to say about this? But at the
Mm,
same time, I was reading a certain amount of Eastern thought, and there was a really interesting podcast that I came across. Just this one episode, like you know how one episode can really get you,
yeah. Yeah.
and it was this episode of the podcast called "Making Sense." Sam Harris's podcast,
Mm,
and it was about self illusion. It was talking about, the title of the episode was "Do We Really Have a Self?" And basically saying that this idea that we have an inner self, that there's an inner space where we've carved out our identity, is a
mm,
creation, is a self-constructed thing. And that
mm,
while everybody has these inner self-constructed identities, it's all constructed in relation to everybody else's identity. So
mm,
there's a continuum that we're on, and to see ourselves as these separate inner worlds against the outer world is actually an illusion. It's like a mirage. It's like, you see it, but it's
mm,
not really the way things are.
mm,
And if you kind of can, like, it creates situations of blame and this corrosive sort of view of other people as being against you.
mm,
And if you stop seeing like this world of other selves acting freely, and you start seeing the flow state of everything, that's like that's a solvent to this hatred. And that anyway, this whole thing really got me. That this
Yeah.
is part of a lot of the songs. And there's a couple songs. There's a song called Win that I wrote as part of a Bushwick Book Club event in Indianapolis at the Kurt Vonnegut Library and Museum, where they invited 5 of us to participate in this residency that lasted a week. And we all were to write songs about banned books because it was banned book week.
Okay.
And I don't know. My book that I was working from was called it was George M. Johnson's "All Boys Aren't Blue," and it was a book, a YA book, young adult book about growing up black and queer in America. When it was like the second most banned book of that year, 2023, I think. And it was, I just broke through to something about people's fear of a young person like that finding their identity, and the reaction of the right and the conservative America to ban these books because they're afraid of their children experiencing the pain and struggle of a young African American person. And it's, again, it relates back to this thing that I was talking about of self-illusion. People think that they're protecting themselves by cordoning off things that they're afraid of, instead of just living with it, living with the ambiguity of it.
Yeah.
And this song like sort of came out of that, and I had to write it in just a few days, and it really was very immediate. And the melody came, and the hook came to me overnight when I was like lying in bed, and I typed it in the phone. I got up in the morning. I just want you to win. Take a look at my face. This is how it begins. And it was just, that became the chorus, and all the thing just poured out. And
Just came out.
Another artist there, his name was Spirit Child, and he is a rapper. And we were all backing each other up for the concert at the end of the week. We're all acting each other's backup musicians. And for his, I asked him, I was like, can you do something on this? This is just going to be great. And he freestyled this thing for that performance.
Amazing. Yeah.
And then that became part of the song. When I went to record it, he brought that back, and it was amazing.
It really is. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a kind of masterstroke. Really, really, really.
It's very surprising when it comes in.
It is, isn't it? It is. Yeah, I was listening to that, and then when I first heard it and it sort of came in, it's like, wow, that I just didn't expect it.
Again, it was a thing that happened, so I incorporated that into the piece, and that experience of, and he's a very intense person and very, very soulful person, and just it was great to have what I perceived as Spirit Child come into this piece, he was just the way he came into my life, and then have them come into this piece in this wonderful surprise way. And so,
but equally, that element of surprise, those two elements of surprise. First of all, in coming into your life, that almost chance meeting, I guess, and then the surprise for, I guess, the imagination that you have to sort of bring him into the song, and then the surprise that gives the listener. I mean, those are just sort of moments of beauty that really, they kind of make life, don't they?
right.
I just kind of think, if people would sort of open their minds to, not just that thing, but other elements where it's not all, this is to be expected, and there's no elements of surprise, which is just makes life so dull. Okay, we're not talking about, kind of, serious stuff, but where we're just kind of talking about life, and being surprised at things is great.
it goes back to that thing I was saying about being a reporter at the same time as, presenting this conception of yourself that is you as an artist. Because, you put a lot of
Yeah.
thought into it and you're like, this is who
Yeah.
I am, or this is how I'm going to try to get attention in the
Yeah.
marketplace or whatever. And which is all understandable. It can be part of your thought process. But Spirit Child's, allowing that thing that happened in my life that was sort of unexpected to come into the work as an unexpected element
Yeah.
was what I'm talking about. It's like, let
Yeah.
something like that inform your work,
Yeah.
and that becomes something that, look, we're talking about it today. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it brings up another interesting point around identity, and like how identities shift, over our lifetime, and then I guess you can kind of get all esoterical about it, but um, y- one thing that I've sort of thought about is how I've had relationships with people, either kind of professional or friendships or just acquaintances, and you start to think about how they perceive me, and then you think, okay, if I want to do something different with myself, whether that's my what I'm doing with my life, how I'm living my life, how I look, and then it's like, okay, well, given how I've worried about what people think of me, it's like, okay, am I brave enough to make those sort of changes? Because those people, I think my brain is telling me that those people perceive me a certain way, either in how I behave, how I look. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's just an interesting sort of concept around how our own identity shift, but can we outwardly represent that shift to other people?
I
It's
think,
easy to represent an identity to somebody who's completely new to you. Somebody you've never
oh,
met
that's
before.
true. That is interesting, right? I mean, I think I do have, for all I profess about trying to be open to allowing my identity to shift with different things that happen in my life, like maybe the
Mm,
example I just gave.
mm.
I do have, I have this very silly way of thinking, like, if someone doesn't email me back right away, I think I've done something. Then I start
Yeah,
searching through my catalog
I
of
hear you.
things like, what did I do to offend this person? It's always me,
Yes.
you know? And then later
I hear you.
it's like, oh, they were out of town or they were just living their lives. They weren't even thinking about me. They were dealing with a thing that I had no idea about. And
Yeah,
I'm always like, okay, I did it again. So I try to know that about myself, even though I still will do it.
yeah,
If I find myself if I find that I'm putting myself into anxiety about something like that, I try to go like, okay, you're just doing this to yourself because for
yeah,
some reason this gives you comfort to feel anxious, So I try
yeah,
to like, okay, I try to take the volume down on it a little bit.
yeah, yeah.
But I mean, as an artist who performs, I really like performing.
Mm,
I There's a lot of wondering how people perceive you because you're presenting something out to the world
yeah,
and you want to express the thing that you're feeling, and you think about, oh, is this way I'm singing and looking going to be what I was originally thinking? Or
mm,
you start analyzing it. And like I said before, there's a certain amount of analysis and pruning and the edit brain. It's good to have that cultivated, but
mm.
in the end, you have to just sort of let your awareness be about just just existing. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
you. It's just you putting it out there, being, breathing, and and vibrating your vibration. God, that sounds so
yeah.
silly, but it's true. It's
No,
like,
it's
I don't
true.
know. I'm going to be singing in front of a couple hundred people on Friday night, singing a Beach Boys song. and in this at Losers Lounge,
Yeah.
and it's going to be really fun. I don't know exactly how it's going to go, but there's something about the Losers Lounge thing. It's that there's usually about 25 of us, and we all perform with this great band at Joe's
Yeah.
Pub in downtown Manhattan. But you only get one song.
Mm.
So, if you're in a band, you get used to the idea of like when you get out on a stage in a club or in a theater or whatever, wherever you're playing, it always sounds weird the first song. It's like, okay, just getting used to the way it sounds in here. It's a little bit chaotic, and you're trying to like
Yeah.
go through the song, follow the linear path of getting the song out there and singing it right and playing it right at the same time as like, oh, everything sounds a little strange. And then usually by the second song, you're like, okay, I'm on even keel now and it's fine. But
Mm.
for these Lizard Lounge shows, it's like you have to you don't have a song to get used to it. You have to, if you want it to be good, you need to be in your body and relaxed from the first note. And it's while you're standing there in the little backstage area, everything goes out of your head. You're just like, I can't remember the first line of the song. Everything is just like,
Yeah.
so I've learned a lot about like how to process nerves and anxiety with that
Right.
show.
Mm.
And it's been really interesting. I've met a lot of interesting people, a lot of great performers who perform in all sorts of different, they're like Broadway singers, and people have been in different bands in the New York City area for years. And it's been a really great experience.
I remember talking about that sort of nerves and anxiety of getting on stage. I remember like one of the very first podcast episodes I did was with Jennifer Finch, and she said, that I had terrible stage fright. I couldn't get on stage, and this would be back in the probably sort of early 90s, late 80s. And talking to a therapist, then the therapist said, well, kind of turn it around and see this anxiety as the positive energy that you need to get on stage. And she said at the time I was like, nah, that's not right. And then she was like, okay, maybe you've got a point. Yeah. She tried
Yeah,
it,
I
and
mean,
it kind of worked.
I think you can always find a way to sort of game it for
Mm,
yourself
mm,
that it is energy. And
yeah.
and and I think, a lot of people are obsessed with things being negative energy or positive energy.
Mm,
And again, I think it's just like I said before, it's a practice to just change your point of view on things. It's
yeah.
not it's that's the one thing that we can do at any time
Mm,
is just see it from another point of view for a second. Even if you
yeah.
can't hold it, allow that you can see that for a second, and that
Mm,
maybe that anxiety that you're having isn't negative energy. Maybe it's excitement that's just
yeah.
it needs to be channeled in the right way.
Mm,
And I don't know. I try to do that. I try to go like remember that you love doing this and that you're exactly where you're supposed to be right now. And then something happens and it turns into that. So,
mm. One thing I'm interested in is which is particularly sort of pertinent for you, I guess, as in your with your various hats on as you know musician, songwriter, and also a producer. Um, when you're working as a producer with all sorts of different people with different personalities, trying to hopefully achieve the same kind of end goal, and then working as a musician, I'm interested in the sort of the approaches that you take with those different hats on. I always think that you've got these various personalities, some say for example introverted, some extroverted. How you adapt to get the best out of people.
well, I mean, there really are different approaches for different personalities. And I think it's
Mm,
just like, it's really about listening.
mm,
And I think, especially when you're producing people, it's about listening to them and making sure they feel heard. And it's a communal space where people are saying their ideas. You, as a producer, are there to facilitate this thing getting finished on one hand, as a product at the end of the process, but you want to create a rapport so that, because I hear horror stories from people all the time about them getting shut down by a producer with their ideas and feeling like just really frustrated with the experience. So even if the idea that they're saying doesn't sound like it's going to be productive or going to work, I always try it anyway. I was going, yeah, let's try that.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
there's a certain part of the time where it's an amazing idea and I just wasn't seeing it. And then when we try it, it's like, oh my God, that was such a great idea. I'm so glad we did it.
Yeah.
And then other times, if it doesn't work or if it just seems like it leads to a dead end, then you can step in and say, actually, why don't we just try this now? And because you allowed that process to happen, the artist you're working with welcomes your input, not instead of being like talked down to, you actually like let the outcome happen and then move forward, But I think that for me, over time, I think I've always instinctively seen these things, but I'm starting to consciously see that there's a certain amount of ordering that can make a track or a song or an arrangement come to life. And it centers around creating conversation between the elements, between the musical elements. And an artist I was working with recently, Jessie Kilgus, brought in her great guitar player, and we were working on this song that had only been played a few times. And I had a sense of where this thing could go. But like her guitar player played this wonderful guitar part throughout the whole song, And, we did a few takes like that. And I said, this is great ideas. Can we just say the thing that you played first and just isolate that? Let's do that at the beginning of the verse and do that at the beginning of the next verse. And then the next part we'll do on a different guitar and make it answer at the end of that line. And so you start breaking up these ideas into different components that sort of talk back and forth to each other.
Yeah.
And he loved it. I mean, all three of us were starting to go like, oh, no, that's great. And then, and then in the middle of that, I would hear like a part that should come in, answer the vocal in the chorus. And instead of telling him what to play, something should go right here, and it should just go like, and I would just sort of like give him a sort of like really general rhythmic idea of where this thing goes, and then he would come up with this wonderful thing. And so it was still a creative back and forth, but my role in that moment was to be a little bit like a film director and be like, okay, let's create some cinema by having these ideas create a call and response for each other. And it can be a long call and response of different, tensions and releases, or you create a very repetitive idea, and then you can break those repetitions up with small surprises, and they become very surprising if you get really used to a certain repetitive groove. If you just then the changes can be really noticeable, So it's like, it's just a matter of, don't take things for granted. Step back for a minute and look at it and go, how can we bring this to life with some conversation between the elements? And that seems to work with any style of music.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of feels like, like an approach that we could almost do within life as well. Around that. I mean, you mentioned the word sort of tolerance, and sort of not just tolerating, but listening to those ideas, and that everybody sort of has some value in what they kind of bring. And then sort of teasing that out for those that are maybe a bit more reticent about sharing their ideas.
It's not easy, because sometimes you have strong feelings and you have anxieties, and certain conversations bring those up, But I think you have to give things a chance and allow those unfamiliar feelings and ideas into your own space,
Yeah.
and because that's what you'd want from someone else.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way interesting things move forward. Different alliances occur, and different.
Yeah.
I, I don't know. I think I agree with that.
When you were growing up and sort of getting into music, you mentioned that your father sort of worked in finance. So I mean, was he encouraging your parents, sort of encouraging
They were
about getting into
very
music?
they were very encouraging, and
Yeah.
they liked music.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so when I was a kid, I grew up in the I was born in 62. So like,
Mm,
and at first my parents didn't have a stereo in the house, and
mm,
this thing happened in the mid 60s where they got a big console stereo towards the end
mm,
of the 60s and they got a bunch of cool records like Abbey Road and
mm.
Hot Rocks by the Rolling Stones and the orchestral version of Tommy
Yeah.
by The Who. But it was, and these records became incredible worlds for me. And this
Yeah.
amazing stereo sounded so beautiful. And they got like interesting, colorful wallpaper and started cooking interesting food and having friends over. And it was that culture got into our suburban lifestyle.
Mm,
And that I happened to be, whatever, genetically and personally predisposed to that stuff, like triggering me, or
yeah.
igniting me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my grandfather was a musician.
Okay.
He had played piano in a radio orchestra in Chicago and did
Oh,
arrangements
amazing.
for them.
Yeah.
And so my parents, as I got more interested in music and started picking up instruments, they bought me one of my first really good basses, the
Yeah.
Rickenbacker. And then, so I became a bass
Wow.
player first. That was the first thing I got
Wow.
good at, is playing bass in high school
Mm,
and playing some bands and stuff. And that led to me working with like two cassette decks and a DJ mixer and a mic. And I started
mm.
bouncing back and forth and building up these songs. I remember I did Taxman by the Beatles.
Yeah.
I had this one little drum and this little tiny splash cymbal, and I used the pillow as a bass drum. And I always had like a sort of a mad scientist approach, and I could see the design of how to create an arrangement
Mm.
even back then.
Wow.
And it took, it led to, with each development, then the Porter Studios came out with the 4-track cassette things.
Mm.
And then eventually sequencing and drum machines came along,
Yeah.
and MIDI and all that stuff came along. And I totally went with that in the 80s.
Wow. Oh,
And,
amazing.
and even so, I was always a musician who liked to play, but
Mm.
I loved this stuff too. And that opened up sound worlds for me that were, that led into this space that I'm in. I continue to be in.
Because I mean, in that time, that sort of era, I guess music was kind of divided or defined a lot more by genre. And I remember one time being at school. I mean, I'm 6 years younger than you. I'm 57 now, but I remember being at school, and it was a time when you sort of had your school bag, and you would write your favorite bands on your school bag and stuff like that. And I remember, I remember, I had I was really into sort of punk rock. Like my first band was the Ramones. They kind of changed my life. But I was also into. I was sort of classically trained. I played the cello. I was classically trained as a
Wow.
sort of kid. So I would like, kind of bands like Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, because they sort of bridged that gap between the sort of the classical feel and the kind of
Sure.
pop and rock world. And I remember like this kid at school who was far bigger than me, and we actually became friends, but at the time, and he was just into punk. He was just like a hardcore sort of punk. And he saw my bag, and so I was like, "Oh my god, he's going to absolutely grill me over this." Um, and he did, of course, But I guess I'm sort of coming to like, that what the approach that you were taking, which was far more, open minded, and embracing the kind of new technologies that were sort of coming along. What sort of, kind of kids and people were you hanging out with that gave you your tribe, I suppose?
Well, it's actually interesting. The I went from going to high school in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area, and a friend of mine in at the end of high school, I met this guy who was kind of a frightening genius.
Mm,
And he wasn't, I was playing in bands and stuff, but I wasn't writing songs yet. But I loved, a lot of different kinds of music,
mm,
just regular FM radio pop music, and I loved prog rock. And I
mm.
learned listening to Yes and playing along to Yes was like that was my trigger for becoming disciplined enough to like learn how to play.
Yeah.
And then this guy was really into Dylan and the Beatles, and he was writing all these songs. And he ended up going east in the United States to Massachusetts and went to this place called Hampshire College. And I ended up following him out to Hampshire, and we formed a band called The Answer with a
Amazing.
bunch of people who didn't know how to play except us, and they learned
Yeah.
how to play. And I don't know, I learned a lot about writing from him because he was a great songwriter. He was kind of a scary genius guy,
Mm.
and he would write 20 songs, in a few weeks, and you'd just be like, "Oh my God." And then once I was there, I started meeting other interesting people, and it was an era of there was like improvised music, and there was like the Philip Glass, Steve Reich sort of minimal composers
Yeah.
coming in, and we were I don't know I did some of it and punk rock, and then learning about the technology kind of came towards the end
Mm.
of my tenure at Hampshire, and I became friends with this guy named Charlie Clouser, who went on to be in Nine Inch Nails and stuff later,
Mm.
10 years later. But
Mm.
I learned all sorts of stuff about how to make electronic gear, how to look at the blank slate of the pattern and song
Mm.
parts of a drum machine and make that into a form that like worked with your song form. And so I never had that thing of like this kind of band or this kind of style was my personal identity.
Yeah.
I liked all sorts of different music, but I liked interesting music,
Yeah.
So I loved XTC,
Mm.
and so I love their punk rock albums. But then when they became like like pop classicists kind of
Yeah.
and made those wonderful albums like English Settlement or Skylarking, I was
Mm.
like, oh, that is me, or I
That's
love
you. Yeah.
Squeeze,
Yeah.
and then I always think Bowie was a good measure for an artist like this who would kind of find a way to express himself through these different styles as a vehicle for self-expression, not
Yeah.
as a mask. People always talked about what's the real Bowie behind the mask? But he was revealing himself through these masks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he'd find
Yeah.
different aspects of his personality. And he was just, he approached his whole career as an art project.
Mm.
And I always found some recognition with that, and then later, bands like Cocteau Twins, and once alternative, not with the capital A, as became in the '90s of
Yeah. Yeah.
that became sort of grunge or something, but alternative as this like great mass of different styles that just weren't on mainstream radio.
Yeah.
and that was really inspiring to me. So I always liked, I don't know, and even through the early 2000s, bands like Animal Collective or Interpol or
Mm,
I don't know, all sorts of bands that like would take different forms of familiar pop music and put something surprising with them.
yeah.
And that's
I,
around the time I worked with Debbie Harry and Blondie.
yeah. I remember doing an interview with uh, Andy Butler from Hercules and Love Affair,
Oh,
and
right, right.
he was saying he made a really interesting point. Actually, I've never really thought of it. That uh, for him, the most exciting time was when a particular when like a genre or a style of music was kind of reaching its end almost like I mean, he gave an example of I think of when acid house was kind of not properly formed. It hadn't really. It was just, wasn't really a thing, but it was sort of starting. And that time when kind of that was sort of starting, or when punk had finished and but post punk hadn't started yet, those kind of in between times, I guess, going back to that sort of liminality, that sort of
Yeah, I was gonna
uncertainty,
say that's the
you know
word.
that's the word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those are the most exciting times because you don't know what it is. You're not following a kind of something that's sort of set. That it's really interesting thinking about that. I mean, I wonder if that happens now, because as you said, there are a lot more net bands and musicians now that are bringing in different styles and influences.
I agree very much. I mean, I think of it a lot because people in discussions of music now, when people talk about genre, and I understand the need to have genre descriptors to
Mm,
start a conversation about music,
mm,
to give people an idea of what your music sounds like before they've heard it.
yeah,
And I'm fine with that. But I think something happened in around the indie era, and especially when the music blogs all swept in the 2000s, and so many
yeah,
people became wonderful advocates for little niche
yeah,
genres that were sort of popping up, and th there became a sort of a gatekeeping protective idea about genres that like
yes,
you see these arguments now on discussions about shoegaze, for instance. It's like,
mm,
this is shoegaze, but this is dream pop. This band is not shoegaze, and I'm like, wow, this is really, for me, that was a really exciting development. And again, it was something that was along the borderlines of some different kinds of alternative music, and this thing
yeah,
sort of popped up. And to me, it came out of like Cocteau Twins and Jesus and Mary Chain, and then it was My Bloody Valentine and
yep,
Slow Dive,
slow dive,
and
yeah,
all these bands they weren't creating, they didn't set out to become a specific thing called shoegaze.
yeah,
They were creating a music that was on the borders of different things, and I don't know. I like to think of genre as a geography, that like
yeah,
there's like a capital city of that genre, and the people, the music that comes from the center of that genre, and you're like,
it's
yeah,
true,
that is it.
yeah,
But
that's a
out at
good
the
point.
edges of these genres, out of the borderlines, there's really interesting stuff going on, and that's the more satisfying for me, the people who are making music around those edges. And I think more and more today, that's where you find really cool stuff. For someone like, I haven't even mentioned like PJ Harvey or something.
Yeah, yeah,
PJ
yeah,
Harvey is like our Bowie, like she's constantly finding new ways to find something that blends these different styles together. And
mm,
some of it's really simplistic, some of it's really sophisticated.
yeah,
And she has a way of just giving it life, because you can tell like she loves it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
like there's no reason for an artist like that to keep making records except that they love doing it. And that you really get a sense of that from someone like that. And there are, lots of new artists now. They I can't keep track of them all, but I've discovered a few that I love. There's this band called Descartes Kant. They're
Okay.
from they're from Mexico,
Yeah.
and they make this amazing mix of something that sounds. And here's I'm using genre descriptors just
Yeah.
because we're not listening to it, but somewhere a mix between like Jane's Addiction and Devo,
Okay.
and it's got this really psychedelic intensity, but also this like they play with these like kind of robotic styled uh, imaging and costumes, and it's very humor. There's a lot of humor to it, but it's really they're great musicians, and it's
Mm,
very catchy. And I don't know. There's a bunch of interesting music that I still stumble on even now.
yeah.
So but I think because we're in a time where there's no big agreed upon delivery system for music,
Mm,
and that these streaming platforms are so diffuse. It's really hard to have. You can get a sense of. You can think that like, well, there's nothing new is going on.
yeah.
It's all just sounds like Sabrina Carpenter or something. And nothing against Sabrina Carpenter, but there's again that's in the center of the geography,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
whereas like there's still a ton of stuff going on at the edges. That's super interesting.
I do hear that a lot as well. People kind of saying, yeah, well, there's nothing really interesting. Music's kind of rubbish these days. There's not a lot going on, and I struggle with that because I guess a kind of part of what I do. I probably I hear quite a bit of new stuff that's going on. Bands that I've never heard of before, and that's the exciting part. Sure, I love going to my kind of old favorites, but just seeing, just from again thinking about mindset, the kind of the and I'm sure PJ Harvey would be a huge example of this. The kind of the curiosity and imagination that goes into some of their
Right.
their creations. The way that they kind of think about music, the way that they approach it is just so like fascinating, and that's what makes it so kind of beautiful. If people could find it, it's the difficulty of finding it these days
I know.
that's the challenge.
And and to me, the only way I find stuff is just by like again scrolling and scattering my
Mm,
attention around,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that can be kind of destructive too, because
yeah,
there's so much our attention is being competed for by these algorithms, and
yeah,
it's not for good. They're
yeah. No,
just trying to use our attention
I
and
agree.
weaponize this stuff. So I get it why people have pulled back, but I don't know. And if not, if you can't do that, just go into your community, go see some live music. I don't know.
Yeah, just what one kind of final thing that I'm interested in is as you get older, do you find yourself um willing to take more risks with your sort of with your music, however you would sort of define risk? Because I guess generally in life we get in some aspects of our life we get a bit more risk averse. How do you feel about it?
It's it's kind of a game of shadows that you play with yourself, because
Mm,
in some ways, people who hear this album that I've just made could hear it as, oh, this all sounds like it's not taking risks. And then other people would say, oh, I don't even understand what's going on here. You won't even stick to one genre on your album. So I don't, I feel like, I mean, there was a review for this album where they really hated the first song. And I know the first song in the album, which is called Cease to Turn, is a little bit confrontational. It's like a big procession. It's very almost prog rock
I
it's
kind of
in
like
how
it.
it presents itself. And boy, it just made this guy uncomfortable. And at first I was like, that's it. But I was like, if it's making someone uncomfortable and then they like other parts of it, that's probably good. Actually,
Yeah.
that's what I want. But I do feel like there's more, each time I finish something, I'm like, okay, I go through a phase. I make stuff so I can listen to it, and I really
Mm,
enjoy listening to these new songs. And I'm playing a show
yeah.
in 2 weeks, and I'm rehearsing the songs and playing with my band, and I love all that. But there's a point at which I go, okay, I can hear the blank space now. I can hear this what I haven't done, and I think I want to do something just that I haven't done yet. And I think I
Mm,
can reach a little further into the direction I started stepping in.
yeah.
So in a sense, I feel like I could take more risks,
Mm.
and maybe I will. I don't know.
But again, I guess again, I mean, we all have our, kind of tolerances and, kind of like attitudes for risk as well. And that's totally fine. And I think, what you said there about sometimes when you step away from it and listen to it and you can kind of like hear, okay, well, that's something that I could maybe do next time, or that's a space that I could fill. I mean,
Right.
just that in itself is just your mind being open to those, those ideas, which, is great.
I mean, well, that's the engine that drives the next record. So it's like it
Yeah.
always has
Yeah.
been. I was in a band called Her Vanished Grace,
Mm,
and we made like 10 albums. And then that split up when my wife and I split up
mm,
in 2013, 2014. And then
yeah.
I started making solo albums. And
Mm,
that was a big
big
change
deal.
for me because
I bet.
I sang in Her Vanished Grace, but so did my wife. So I was always like the other singer. And
Yeah.
to be the focal point and sort of group leader of my own thing was it was an adjustment, and
I bet.
I've gotten so I really like being the vehicle for this. I like
Yeah.
expressing myself as a performer and playing a whole set and making these whole albums. I mean, this is like the fifth album I've made,
Yeah.
and I'm so that's what keeps driving it. I keep hearing something that I haven't quite done yet, and then and bringing in the familiar mixed with the unfamiliar
Yeah.
is where it's kind of I'm bringing it back to the first thing I said, where it's like it's uh it's a matter of being who you are, but also doing something unexpected that's just reacting to what's going on around you.
Yeah. And that's where the growth happens, right? Isn't it? Like
Yeah,
you said.
and it makes it interesting. So like when you listen
Yeah.
back to it, you're like, oh, that's it's like a little diary of what's going on in your life, and what's
Yeah.
going on in everyone's life.
Yeah.
So
Well, I love it, and that's all that matters anyway. So that's
well, thank you. I'm relieved.
uh, Charlie. Thank you so much. It's been
Thank
brilliant
you so
talking
much.
to you. Been an
Yeah, it's great.
absolute education.
I'll, for me too.